Is it not? Amen. Oh, you have just been a reset to my soul. What a blessing it has been to be with you this week. Thank you. And a special thank you to your leader, my dear friend Dan Linrud. And I have an embarrassingly small token of my appreciation. I don't know, Dan, if you're still around here. Just a very small thank you. What a blessing to be with your community, your people. I love you. And don't get too excited. It's just a copy of one of my books. So it's not much. I told you it wasn't much.
Did you sign it?
I did sign it for you right there.
Wow,
so
you.
There you go. And it's actually the most recent book that just got published. Although it's a reprint from a book 30 years ago, and it's coming out again as the youth devotional. And so if you're interested, or if you ever need to give a short devotional thought, or especially to teens or young people, this book is full of all of my favorite stories, and you can pick it up on sale at the ABC, and they wanted me to tell you that. So I'm not pushing my books, but here we go. All right. So truly, what a blessing to be here. Well, Haddon Robinson, pastor and author, tells about a locust plague that happened at the turn of the 19th century that destroyed hundreds of thousands of acres in Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa. And he writes this. He says, locusts don't have a king to get organized. They don't have a draft board to call them into ranks. By instinct, the locust knows it has to be in community with other locusts. When that occurs, they are able to topple kingdoms. The wisdom of the locust is the wisdom that tells us that we must live in community. And so this week, that's what we've been talking about. The wisdom of the locusts, that we have to live in community. And tonight we're talking specifically about that wisdom piece. So we will consult the diary, the journal of the wisest man who has ever lived. Now, would you agree with me that there is a difference between being smart and being wise? Now, you can have all the degrees of a thermometer and an Ivy League education and be really smart, but not necessarily live wisely, right? Now, I have always stood in awe of smart, brainy people. I grew up in New England in the shadow of all these Ivy League universities, and I've always been very intimidated by smart people because I'm not that smart. Case in point, when I went to defend my dissertation, you can understand why I was really nervous, and so my good friend, Pastor Troy, offered to actually fly from Washington back to Michigan just as a support. Very kind of him, although the night before in the hotel, I could tell he was not taking this whole thing as seriously as I was. As I was feverishly cramming, Troy was compiling a long list of very random words like dodgeball and kumquats. Then he explained, here's the deal, Karl. For every one of these words that you can seamlessly weave into your defense tomorrow, I'll give you $1. I'll even give you a $5 bonus word, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Well, I can tell you the next day, the last thing on my mind was trying to work in his silly words. Things really got hot when the external examiner started to grill me. And she said, now, Mr. Haffner, I see that you call this a phenomenological study, and yet nowhere in your research do you ever quote the father of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. Now, surely you did that for a reason, but I can't understand why. Could you explain? The reason I never quoted Husserl is because I'd never heard of the dude. Now, in my defense, how was I to know that like phenomenology had its own daddy? Well, how do you know this stuff? I have no idea. And then I remembered a tip. Somebody said, look, if you get in trouble and there's a question that you can't answer, just turn it around and ask a question of the questioner. So I asked her, Edmund Husserl, is that the man who loved playing dodgeball and eating kumquats while singing supercalifragilistic? $7 right there. Figured I might as well walk out of the room with something because it wasn't going to be a diploma. I've always been in awe of really smart people. But being smart isn't necessarily the same thing as living with wisdom. My favorite story on this that I have told often, you probably remember it, that of Randy Johnson, the nephew of the former president, Lyndon B. Johnson. He was a quarterback at Oklahoma State University, a mediocre athlete on a less than average team that year, his senior year, but they knew if somehow they could pull off an upset, last game of the year against their in-state rivals from the University of Oklahoma, they would be elevated to the status of superhero on their campus. If they could just somehow pull off the upset. Well, they were in the game right up until the very end, only a few seconds left, but with time remaining for one more snap, they had to score a touchdown. Now, as a tribute to Randy and the other seniors in the huddle, the coach told Randy, you can call the play. Whatever play you want, I trust you. So Randy called play number 13, which surprised everybody in the huddle because, well, it was a trick play that they had never executed in a game, let alone with the whole game and the season really on the line. They never even practiced it in practice, and yet he called this complicated trick play. And wouldn't you know, they pulled it off to perfection, scored a touchdown, carried Randy off on their shoulders. Coach couldn't wait to corner him in the locker room. He had to know, Randy, like what on earth possessed you to call play number 13? I mean, in retrospect, it was genius, but I would have never expected that. Well, what were you thinking? And he said, well, Coach, you got to understand, this was an emotional moment because I've been in the trenches with some of these guys for 4 years. We battled it out, and we all kind of knew this would be the final play of our football careers. And I looked over to my buddy Matt right next to me, really muddy jersey, and I looked at his number 8, and then right next to him, my good friend Paul, number 7, and I just added up the numbers and called play 13. And the coach said, but Randy, 8 plus 7, it doesn't equal 13. He said, you know what, Coach, you're right. But if I was as smart as you, we'd have lost the game. So you can be really smart and still lose in the game of life. And so we are going to consult the journal of the wisest man who has ever lived. And to get at this, we're going to break up our lives into 4 seasons. So let's just assume all of us are going to die at age 100. Except those who live in the blue zones, we will live to 110. And every 25 years represents a different season. So if you're up to the age of 25, you now are in the spring season of life. If you're 26 to 50, you're in the summer season of life. 51 to 75, you are in the autumn. And how many of you are kind of doing the math ahead and think, oh man, I'm already in the winter season of life? And so each season, Solomon gives us wisdom. He begins with the youth. To those in the spring season of life, he gives this counsel: be happy, young man, young woman, while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. His advice is very simple to young people. When you're young, just live with joy. Be happy. Now, you would think for young people today who truly have every modern convenience to make their lives really cushy and comfortable, all of these technological wonders at their fingertips, you would think all young people in the world would be just deliriously happy, right? UNICEF did a study a while back of the 21 most developed nations in the world, trying to determine what nation boasts of the happiest kids. What country has the happiest young people? Anybody want to guess what country was at the top of that list with the happiest kids? What was it? Mexico? It's Mexico. I don't think that was it. Denmark. And also the other Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Finland and so on. And the reason being because those countries really place a high value on community. Anybody want to guess where the United States is at? I didn't hear any of you guess our country. We were not last. That's good. But we were next to last. The least happy young people, most miserable kids in the world hail from England. William Falk, in the Week Journal, gives this commentary on that study. He says, it would be comforting to shrug off the report as pure anti-American buncombe. But as a parent of a teen and a tween, I cannot. I've seen firsthand the emptiness that haunts so many middle-class kids today. From an early age, they are taught that life is this pitiless pursuit of individual gratification and success, requiring above-average brains and above-average looks. There's no sense of context or community or higher purpose. It's hardly surprising, then, that so many of them are taking antidepressants, ADHD meds, or other pills. Many more hide their sadness in eating disorders, drugs, or meaningless hookups. In our rush to give children everything, I'm afraid that we have forgotten to help them answer a question that will not be ignored. What is this all for? Give kids everything. Except the answer to the most pressing question in life: what's the point? What's the purpose behind all of this? So Solomon says, if you're young, if you're in that spring season of life, be happy. Live with joy, because it doesn't take long, and soon you find yourself in that next season, roughly from the age of about 25 to 50, where we're making our mark in the world, making a lot of money, fattening the portfolio, buying yachts and cars, advancing in the job market and so on, and we're successful. And Solomon knew this season of life. Man, was he ever successful. He writes in Ecclesiastes 2, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself, planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs and water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves, had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned many herds and flocks, and anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed great amounts of silver and joy, all for myself. Oh, he was successful. 2 Kings tells us that the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. Now, this was just one of many different revenue streams. 666 talents, which in today's currency would be roughly about $350 million. Think about that. $350 million. That's more than I make in a whole month. No, it is. 2018, Harvard Business School undertook a first-of-its-kind study where they interviewed over 4,000 multimillionaires, many of them billionaires. And they asked them a number of questions around the subject of happiness. Are you happy? Can you believe only 13% of the respondents said they had enough money to be happy? Just 13%. The rest, they then asked the follow-up question. How much money would it take so that you could answer on a scale of 1 to 10 that I'm 10? I'm perfectly happy with this amount of money. Average answer came back 10 times more than I have now. So to the people who have $10 million in the bank, they say, oh, if I could just have $100 million, then I'd be happy. Really? Solomon will declare in his journal over and over, looking at all of his success and all of his gold and silver and slaves and concubines and all of this stuff that's presumably there to make him happy. And he will exclaim, meaningless, meaningless. It's all just meaningless. One paraphrase renders that verse, it's all cotton candy. Some years ago, I received a phone call from a gentleman I had never met, and he introduced himself and said, I heard from a friend of a friend that sometimes you conduct funerals, and my wife just died, and I was wondering if you would officiate at her service. And I told him I'd be honored to do that, and he said, now, not to worry, you will be compensated handsomely. Well, I didn't think much of that, until we had arranged a time for me to come visit him in his home. I still remember audibly gasping when I drove down the tree-lined paved driveway and saw his mansion. I was met at the door by one of his butlers and was instructed to wait there in the lobby of his home, which had full-grown trees in the lobby of his house. He also had this large waterfall. Then eventually the butler escorted me back to a seating area there, and the gentleman came out. And once again, he reiterated how thankful I am, he said, that you're willing to do this funeral for us, and not to worry, you will be compensated handsomely. And I explained to him, well, I actually work for my denomination, and they pay me, and so I don't really charge or expect any kind of honorarium for funerals or weddings or whatever. I'm just honored to participate, and you don't have to pay me anything. And he said, very well, then I won't. Which is fine, except To this day, I really regret not at least asking him, so how do you define compensated handsomely? I really will never know, and it bugs me to this day. And so I said, well, tell me a little bit about your wife. I had my legal pad out, and he said, well, she loved to shop. And so I wrote that down, and I said, what else? And he said, well, she really loved shopping. And so I underlined it a couple of times. I said, tell me more. What kind of a person was she? Well, she was just passionate about, were you there? Yeah, shopping. And I said, well, okay, I understand that. And he said, oh no, you don't understand. I said, come, follow me. So I fell in line behind him as we walked down this marbled hallway. We stood outside one closed door, and before we walked in, he almost whispered reverently, he said, this was her blouse room. And so we walked in, and it was just crammed with maybe a half dozen of these huge circular hanger units like you see at Nordstrom. Every one of them just crammed with blouses. And I noticed that most of them still had the price tag dangling from the sleeve. We walked out of that room, walked down the hallway a little further, and then before we walked through the next door, we paused, and he said this was her shoe room. So we walked in. It was like the Library of Congress. Instead of books, boxes of shoes. They had ladders in there to get up in the stacks. Just probably thousands of pairs of shoes. I have no idea. It was a big room. Just shoes. Then we went to the next closed door. Before we entered, he said this was her fur coat room. He said there's over $10 million of fur coats in this room. Well, at the funeral, at his request, I opened up the floor and asked if anybody wanted to share a memory of this person, and nobody responded. And so I decided to double down and started begging and said, is there anybody, just anybody, who could say anything? For heaven's sake, help me here. I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. And nobody said anything. They just sat there. And so does somebody have something that they can say about her? Finally, a gentleman way in the back of the small chapel raises his hand. He said, well, I know the salespeople at Nordstrom are really going to miss her. I'll take it. I said, thank you for that beautiful testimony. And then we left and ate potato salad in the fellowship hall. And I still remember driving home, just feeling this profound sense of sadness. Not because, of course, there's anything wrong with shopping or liking blouses or shoes. No. But it just felt heavy as I thought about that legacy. You think maybe one more blouse, she would have been happy? I kind of doubt it. I don't think so. Solomon amassed this incredible fortune. And as he's reflecting on his life and he's thinking about his bank account and his portfolio and how easy he has it in life, he screams, it's meaningless. Don't waste the summer season of your life chasing cotton candy, because it's not long. And you find yourself in the autumn season of life. And this is that period when you begin to think a lot about how did life go by so quickly? How did my kids grow up so fast? How did this happen? It's like overnight, they were babies, and now they're grown and gone. And Solomon has this counsel for those of us in this season of life. He says, enjoy life with your spouse, whom you love. Now, here again, he just underscores the importance of relationships. Invest your life in meaningful relationships with your family, with your church family, with your community, with God. Enjoy life with the people that you love all the days of this meaningless life, because nothing else will bring meaning. God has given you under the sun all of these meaningless days, for this is your lot in life. And in your toilsome labor under the sun, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for in the grave where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. We are all going to the grave. And so Solomon challenges us as he's thinking back over his life. He's saying, just enjoy life with the people that you love, because the quality and the happiness in your life is directly proportional to the quality of the relationships that you have. And it goes by so quickly, doesn't it? It seems like yesterday. It was 1991, I think, the last time I was at the Gladstone Camp Meeting. It just goes by so quickly. And it's funny because, we see each other, and some of you I haven't seen for, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be. And it's funny because we look at other people who we haven't seen for a long time, and we think, let's be honest here, man, they're really looking old. But we don't feel any older. Can I get an amen? I mean, we feel young. I feel like I just graduated from college, but I don't look that way to you. I know I don't when I see you, even though you might say, well, you just look exactly like you looked in college, only without hair. But I know it's not true. It's like the old story, another favorite story of mine. You remember the woman who moved to a new community and went to the dentist for the first time, and as she was looking around some of the certificates and diplomas in the lobby there, she saw the name, which happened to be the same name of her old high school crush. I mean, he was her heartthrob. Now, they never dated because he didn't even know that she existed, but oh, how she was in love with this guy. I mean, he was tall and dark and handsome, incredibly athletic and smart. He was the full package. And so she indulged in some of those memories for a while, and then she was called in and started talking to this guy. Well, as soon as she saw him, she knew, okay, this is not the same guy that I am remembering in high school. They have the same name, but this is not, because he was, old and bald and fat, and he didn't look anything like what she remembered this guy. But, as they talked, she began to once again wonder. And just a couple of things he said, and finally she just asked, you didn't by chance go to Morgan Park High School, did you? Yes, I'm a Mustang. Really? Class of 56? No kidding. I was in your class. Really, he said. Well, what class did you teach? She saw him getting a lot older. That autumn season, it flies by, and before you know it, we're in that winter phase of life. And Solomon has very vivid language here, where he describes in detail the days of trouble during this wisdom season of life. And so he says in chapter 12, near the end of his journal, he says, remember your Creator in your days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Like when you're young, be happy, be filled with joy, live life to its fullest, and invest yourself in the stuff that really matters, namely relationships. Be connected to God, be connected to family, be connected to one another. Because in the end, that's the only thing that matters. And soon, you will be facing the days of trouble. And then he describes them. Verse 3, when the grinders become few. The grinders are what? Yeah, your teeth, when they start falling out. And those looking through the windows grow dim. What are your windows? Yeah, when your eyesight begins to fail you. I have a good friend who is my age, and through the years, he used to always give me a hard time because I have to wear contacts or glasses, and he was so proud of himself that he never needed glasses, not for reading, not for anything, and we went our separate ways for, probably, 20 years, and then we crossed paths not long ago at a camp meeting, and I noticed he was resting a pair of glasses on his forehead. And I said, hey, notice you're wearing glasses now. He quickly grabbed them, shoved them in his pocket. He said, I only use them for driving. And I said, well, why don't you just get a prescription windshield? Makes sense to me. Solomon goes on. When men rise at the sound of birds, but their songs grow faint. This is such a descriptive, insightful verse. When we rise at the sound of birds, in other words, we don't sleep as well as we get older, do we? You never see little kids, hey, Rebecca, how'd you sleep last night? When the sound of birds just makes it hard to sleep. But then he says, but all their songs grow faint. We begin to lose our hearing. When the almond tree blossoms, have you ever seen an almond tree in full blossom? I know you have some around here, right? Just this shimmering silver, a majestic tree in full blossom. Your hair grows gray. When the grasshopper drags himself along, that's a vivid picture, isn't it? When the giddy up and go is just gotten up and gone. When the skin under a woman's elbow grows all baggy and wrinkly. That's actually not in there. But it should be. When desire is no longer stirred. Now, you may be young now. Pretty soon the grinders will start falling out. And the windows are going to grow faint. When you find yourself in the season of life, Solomon says, where I am now, and you're reflecting on your journey, just remember your Creator. Invest yourself in relationships. Alexander Solzhenitsyn provides a wonderful statement about growing old. He says, how much easier it is then, how much more receptive when we are to death, when advancing years guide us softly to our end. Aging thus is in no sense a punishment from on high, but brings its own blessing and a warmth of colors, all its own. There is even warmth to be drawn from the waning of your own strength compared with the past, just to think how sturdy I once used to be. You can no longer get through a whole day's work at a stretch, but how good it is to slip into the brief oblivion of sleep, and what a gift to wake up once more to the clarity of your second or third morning of the day. And your spirit can find delight in limiting your intake of food, in abandoning the pursuit of novel flavors, growing old serenely is not a downhill path, but an ascent. Here is wisdom's bottom line. Every season of your spiritual journey is rich as you walk with God and one another. So remember your Creator. Remember your relationships. Remember others. And your life will be rich. I'll leave you with a picture of this. Some years ago, I officiated at a funeral. And when we finished, everybody passed by the open casket. And the last person in line was this woman's husband. She had been married to him for well over 50 years. And I struggled in that moment because I didn't know if maybe I should just give him time alone to say goodbye, or if I should just stay there with him to show support. And so I decided I'll just stay here for at least a few minutes. And I dropped my gaze, and I noticed that one last time, he took her hand into his. And I thought through all of the stories that he told me in preparation for the service. He told me how they met at a barn party in northern Idaho. He said, I saw her, and for the first time, it was like I couldn't breathe. I had never seen a human being so beautiful. He said, it took me over 2 hours before I finally mustered up the courage to ask her to dance. But when I took her hand into my sweaty palm, I knew, as we were whirling around that dance floor, I had found my soulmate for life. I thought about their hands at the altar, slipping rings on each other's fingers, promising before God and others till death do us part. I thought about their hands in the delivery room, him squeezing her hand, whispering words of encouragement. You're almost there, sweetheart. We almost have now. Beautiful little boy, just hang in there. You're doing great. And then for a time, they had 2 chubby little hands between their hands. Then there were 4 and 6. They had 3 children, but it wasn't long. Those kids grown and gone. And I thought about their hands now polka dotted with age spots, shivering just a bit, both of them, as they clutched that knife and they slid it through the 50th wedding anniversary cake. And then feeding each other a slice of cake, just as they had done 50 years before. In more recent years, I thought of their hands at home. The kids told me that as their mom was getting close to the end, her doctor encouraged their dad to rub her hands and her feet every day because he said it would help her circulation. And so the kids told me every time we'd come home to visit mom and dad, we found dad right there next to her on the sofa, rubbing her hands. And now one last time I looked and he held that hand. And in that moment he looked up to me and he said, it seems like yesterday we were dancing at that barn party. He said it went by just like that. And it's over. Now, we all know, don't we, the truth of his words. It goes by so quickly. So look, friends, so long as God entrusts to you another day of life, live wisely. Invest yourself fully in your relationships. Nothing else matters as much as this. Your connection to God and your connection to one another. May we all, in the name of Jesus, live wisely. Amen.